Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Charlie, who's an intermediate photographer from Texas. This image was created as part of an assignment called Old Galveston that Charlie participated in with his camera club. And Charlie said that he was really drawn to this house on Galveston Island because it's a survivor. He really felt like this house and the entrance to this house expressed the idea of a home like this surviving 100 years of hurricane with all the weathering on the wood. And Charlie shot this with a Canon 40D 17 to 55 zoom at ISO 400, stopped down to f7.1 and exposed the file for 2/50th of a second. I think the suggestion of time in this photograph, that element of story, is extraordinary. It's the weathering of the wood, but it's also just the architecture. The details and the overall architecture here are really beautiful, and that also is suggesting sort of time gone by. This whole thing is like an old weathered photograph. The wood on the outside is so weathered, it's almost sort of the sepia monochromatic look. Speaking of color, this is a really gorgeous image from a color theory standpoint. One takeaway from today's presentation is just knowing how well red plays with monochromatic ideas like gray or light gray or black or white. Really beautiful complementary color pairs here. Blue plays with the rust of the orange, cyan plays with red from the printer's color wheel. The patina on the metal here, violet plays with yellow from the painter's color wheel as a complementary color pair, and then green and red from the painting color wheel, and more color up in here. There's also a flow of light here. Even though it's subtle, you really get the sense of where the light is coming from right here on this light fixture. But it's happening down in here too, and the pattern of highlight shadow is driving depth into an image. It could really start to flatten out. We come in and shoot a doorway or a window and lose the third dimension for the viewer, and there may not be enough for the viewer to hold on to, and the color and the lighting here is helping do that. In the most basic sense, I'd like to do two things. I'd like to correct a little bit of this parallax distortion. Is sort of like the one vertical line in the image that's different and relative to that kind of distortion. All these lines are running parallel to the visual sea level of the edge of the frame. And then the other thing I'd like to do in the most basic sense is just give this a lot more depth. The potential is there, and I'd like to really give this more of the third dimension. So here we go. I copied the background. It's going to be grayed out right here, but I went to Edit, Transform, and then selected Skew and pulled on the bounding box and just eyeballed it to get rid of this. And that's that change right there. There are two changes that are combined on this layer called Garden, and I'm going to show you the main thing that I did there. I did a little bit of cleanup. I got rid of this wire that's sticking down so that it doesn't compete with this triad of ideas, and I got rid of this, and I got rid of a few high contrast areas down here. Those are details. I did something else that's a lot more important. I went to Adjustment, Curves, and choose this series of new tools in CS4. This eyedropper right here will let me sample a black point in the image, and I clicked right there. And the reason I clicked right there is that's a closed shadow under that storm shutter, and to me, if we're exposing for the highlights, if we're shooting on slide film, for sure that would go black. And the digital camera really leaves shadows open, particularly if we're shooting in RAW mode, and that can start to rob our image of depth right away. And if we don't do anything to get that back, then we can start to lose the low end that can really start to define form. If I click right there, I love what's happened in the lower part of the image. If I leave that in normal blending mode, to me, I've got a lot of the sort of depth that I wanted right away in one change. And I'm using these eyedroppers quite a bit now. It's one of the things I love about CS4, particularly this setting a black point and setting a gray point. So what I'm going to do is go back to layers and just trash this, because I've already done that change. But please hear me say that I applied it only down here and not up here, because I didn't want this to go any darker than it already is. I actually want to open that up. So there's that change. And then I did another technique that I love to do. I want to sort of accentuate this hard light feeling in some places, or flow of light. And to do that, I'll take a layer like this. I'll Apple J or Control J to copy it. There it is right there. And then I'll go to hard light blending mode, and then add a mask and fill the mask with black and paint that in selectively. So let's throw this away, and that's what I've done right here. Just creating this feeling of light kind of raking across the front. The next thing that I did was a curves adjustment to open up the top part so the eye can get in there a little bit more. The next thing I did was a levels adjustment to create a lighting effect, like light is coming in from here. It already was, but I just exaggerated that to give a little bit more form and depth to the top part. The next thing I did here was a curves adjustment to get rid of contrast on these storm shutters on the outside. And what I'm going to do is get rid of contrast, and then I'm going to do something else to try and just give this more dimension. One of the ways we can create separation is low contrast, high contrast. There's already low color contrast out here, but let's get rid of some of the value contrast. And here's that change, and I did that using curves and applying it locally. And then I'm going to come right back in and use one of my favorite techniques now to really give this a lot of form. I'm going to paint on a blank layer in soft light blending mode with black, and that's the change right there. And let me go ahead and show you what those pixels look like. I really tried to stop the eye on that outside post where you could just wander right out of the frame and keep going. And by making that much darker out there, it's really making the door come forward quite a bit more. And then I did a couple of other things up here that I don't even know what they are anymore. They're so detailed. Let's see. I think I added a little bit of blue to that the area right up here, and I cut down on the saturation on the windows, but those things are really subtle. Here's where we started, and here's where we ended up. And please hear me say I'm not making any assumptions about Charlie. This is just kind of a note to all of us. I want you to watch the histogram now when I turn all the layers on and off. And the thing is that the histogram after the changes would look a lot more like the histogram you would get if you shot this scene on slide film and exposed for the highlights and then scanned the slide. And I just think in a general sense, one of the things that's happening to us as digital photographers is the raw files are so damn flat. That's great from a potentiality standpoint, but very few people are going to work with that as a final image to print. The fact that it's flat is what makes it such a great potential. And then there's the drum beat to get detail everywhere on your histogram, but that's just a starting point. And then if we don't start to really end up with images, particularly scenes like this, where the pixels are sort of biased, and we just have this kind of homogeneous histogram, then we can end up with images that are really flat. And please hear me say this also has to do with personal taste. So it would be interesting to hear feedback on this. I do feel like this has a lot of dimension, but for some people I will have gone way too far. The reality is this is a beautifully seen shot. Charlie's picked an awesome subject matter. He's shooting in a really gorgeous quality of light that gives the potential for depth and form. He's seen beautiful color here. He's framed this in a way that really lets the doors have enough space to be in where we can sort of get to them and find them. It's a gorgeous shot, and we want to thank Charlie for sharing it with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique.